I'll build you a home, and you'll give me a family. Millionaire CEO promised to the widowed nurse. Before we dive in, I want to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Type your city in the comments so we can see just how far this story reaches. And when we get to the end, I dare you to rate it from 0 to 10, because this one might just break your heart. Now, lean back, close your eyes, and let the story begin. It was a winter evening, and the small seaside clinic was just about to close. Beyond the glass door, fog clung to the window panes, and the glow of a lone street lamp spilled across the quiet, brick-paved street. Inside, Hannah, 34 years old, a widow, was sorting through patient files after another long day. She was used to the silence, used to going home alone, used to a life where quiet routines filled the spaces where love used to be. Until the door opened, a man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, with a fine dusting of ocean mist on his coat, his storm-gray eyes fixed on hers steady, unflinching. He didn't make small talk. He didn't smile. He didn't even introduce himself. Instead, he spoke one sentence, a sentence that shattered Hannah's carefully kept silence. I'll build you a home, and you'll give me a family. Those words, spoken under the golden light and the salt-stained air of the Oregon coast, were not a flirtation. They sounded more like a contract, a promise, heavy with the authority of a wealthy CEO, yet ringing like destiny's quiet knock at the door. A small town, two hearts marked by loss, and one extraordinary promise. Gull's Point, a coastal town in Oregon, where brick streets wind their way to silver-tipped waves, where the wind carries salt, sorrow, and memory. In the center of it all, the little community clinic kept its lights on every night, a fragile heart beating faithfully against the storm. Inside that room was Hannah Voss, 34, head nurse, widow. Once she had everything. Then, 3 years ago, a rare illness claimed her husband, leaving her with a heart sealed tight. She carried on with her work, with compassion, with the duty of care. To the townspeople, she was the angel of Gull's Point, but in her own eyes, she was just a shadow, moving quietly through each day. And then another shadow stepped into her life. James Marshall, 38, a brilliant engineer, a millionaire who lived quietly on the edge of town. People only glimpsed him at the farmer's market, wearing an old flannel shirt, carrying apples or a homemade pie. No one knew that he had once stood at the very top of Seattle's financial world. No one knew the losses that had carved silence into his gaze, turning his ash-gray eyes into deep, unspoken oceans. And so it was on that winter night By the sea, that a strange vow was spoken. I'll build you a home, and you'll give me a family. Part 1. The Strange Proposal. Gull's Point Clinic was nearly closed for the night. Outside, the winter air was heavy with ocean mist, the kind of damp chill that made the yellow ceiling light above the hallway glow weak and tired. At her desk, Hannah Voss bent over patient files, her slender fingers sorting papers with the quiet patience she had trained into herself over the last 3 years. These dry, clinical sheets were all that remained of a long day a day she had poured into weary eyes and aging bodies of her small-town neighbors. When everyone else went home to their families, Hannah went home to her little apartment, where silence waited for her like an old companion. A gust of wind slipped through the doorframe, brushing against the glass wind chime hanging nearby. Its crystal notes chimed softly, like the ocean, letting out a sigh. Hannah looked up, ready to say the familiar words, "We're closed for the night." But the sentence froze on her lips. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, so tall that she had to tilt her chin slightly to take in his face beneath the pale clinic light. Broad shoulders blocked the wind behind him, his dark hair still damp with mist, his storm gray eyes locked onto hers, steady and unblinking. Hannah recognized him. James Marshall, the man she'd glimpsed on Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, usually in an old flannel shirt, his strong hands cradling a bag of apples, a homemade pie, or a jar of local honey. They had never spoken beyond polite greetings, but tonight, James carried something different with him, no longer just another quiet customer. There was an air of authority about him, the steel of someone who once made decisions in boardrooms. Under the cold light, the veins along his hand showed where it rested inside his thick coat pocket. "Good evening." His voice was low, warm, but firm. Hannah nodded, keeping her composure. "Sorry, the clinic is about to close. Do you need medical help?" James stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. The cold night stayed outside, sealed away. He didn't circle around with small talk. He didn't explain. He just looked into her eyes and spoke, as though he had rehearsed these words 1,000 times. "I'll build you a home, and you'll help me build a family." It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a flirtation. It was a contract, spoken into the quiet air of a clinic that still smelled of alcohol and antiseptic. Hannah froze, her pulse tightening, as though those words had yanked her back 3 years to the day of a funeral, the day she believed she would never again hear the word family spoken to her. Her lips trembled as she forced a thin smile, trying to mask the tremor in her chest. This is how you try to charm a woman." James didn't blink. He only gave a slow nod, steady as a vow. "No, I'm serious. And in that instant, under the weak yellow light, with the sea fog pressing in, Hannah knew her quiet life had just been broken open. The silence stretched taut between them. From the reception desk, the scent of disinfectant mixed with the briny night air. Hannah clasped her hands together, hiding the faint tremor she hated even admitting to herself. "Who are you, really?" she asked, calm but firm, the way a nurse steadies herself when the unexpected walks through the door. James didn't move closer. His eyes stayed on hers, and his voice dropped lower, slower. "James Marshall, structural engineer. I own Marshall & Co., a small investment and construction firm, enough to let me live the way I choose. This morning, I signed for the Callahan property out on the point." From his coat pocket, he pulled a black drafting tube and set it on her desk as if it carried a beating heart. He popped it open, and sheets of paper unfurled, pencil lines crisp under the light, a façade facing the sea, windows long and narrow like ribbons of light, a porch roof spilling shadow across weathered wood. "This isn't just a house," he said, lifting his gaze to hers. "This will be a home, and I can't build it alone." Another gust slipped through the cracks, stirring the glass chime. Hannah's eyes flicked down at the sketches, then back at him. Among the precise angles and flawless lines, she saw something softer. Tiny notes in neat handwriting, low windows, so children can see the sea. Open kitchen, warm and bright. No steps at entry easier for the elderly. "Why me?" she whispered, as though afraid of the answer. James slowly peeled off his gloves, revealing calloused hands. Hands that had touched real wood, not just signed checks. He rested one palm on the desk between them, keeping a careful distance, because you know how to keep hearts beating when they're about to give up. "I've seen you at the market, guiding an old man to his car, pausing in the rain to tuck a blanket over a sick child's shoulders. Small things, but small things hold the nails to the frame. A home needs that." Hannah gave a soft laugh, not quite amused, more fragile than she wished. "You don't know me. Not really. I don't think about family anymore." His storm gray eyes darkened for a moment, then gentled. "I don't need you to change overnight. I'm only asking you to help me lay a foundation. If it feels weak, you can walk away anytime." "And this is how a CEO negotiates?" she asked, tilting her head, trying to hide the sudden hitch of her heartbeat. His lips curved slightly, not quite into a smile. "This is how a man tries to live honestly. I could pour concrete in 6 months and be done, but I don't want concrete. I want a home that breathes, that holds the smell of baking bread, the sound of laughter, even the silence of rainy nights. I want something money can't buy." unless someone knows how to keep the rhythm alive. The words pressed against the tender place in Hannah she had locked away, a fragile place, still raw with memory. She looked away to the wet street outside, where the lamplight spilled like fallen stars. "And if I say no?" she asked softly. James gathered the drawings, rolling them with precision, snapping the cap shut. The steel watch on his wrist caught the light subtle, understated, carrying the weight of a man who had once held billions in his hands. "Then I'll still build for the town, for those who need shelter. But if you say yes," his voice steadied, a quiet promise, "I'll build a place with a hook by the door just for your coat, a kitchen drawer marked Hannah, and a window low enough for a child to see the horizon." Her throat tightened, not from the promise itself, but from those details so small, so ordinary, yet the kind only someone who had known loss would understand. "When?" she whispered. 7 a.m. "Tomorrow." At the point, he stepped back, courteous, as though concluding a meeting, but one where sincerity had the final word. "If you come, we begin. If you don't, I'll never ask again." He turned, opened the door, mist rushed in. The ceiling light flickered like a tired blink. Outside, the black SUV purred quietly to life. The door closed, the glass chime rang, and silence fell taut as a drum skin. Hannah stood there for a long time, a patient's blood pressure chart, caught in the draft, slid off the desk to the floor with a small sound that felt like something cracking inside her chest. 7 m. She didn't have to decide tonight, but time has a way of pushing hearts toward decisions. That night, the clinic went dark, but in Hannah's small apartment, a yellow desk lamp spilled across the window. The room was barely big enough for a single bed, a worn bookshelf, and a tiny kitchen that still smelled faintly of baked bread. She sat motionless, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, staring at her shift schedule, yet not reading the words. James's voice, replayed in her mind, etched there like an iron brand. "I'll build you a home, and you'll help me build a family." She laughed, once thin, hoarse, joyless. Family. Once, it had meant mornings filled with laughter, dinners with someone waiting across the table. Then, one day, it disappeared, leaving her to fight the echo of empty rooms. For 3 years, she had locked every door inside her heart, yet a near stranger had dared to knock loud enough to rattle the lock. Why her? There were so many women wealthier, younger, more radiant. She was just a community nurse in a small town, shoulders bent from lifting patients, dark circles from night shifts, a widow who no longer dreamed of romance. She opened a drawer and lifted a wooden box. Inside lay the few keepsakes of her late husband, a wedding photo, her in white, laughing, his hand gripping hers as though they'd never let go. Her chest tightened. She set the photo down and closed her eyes. "I don't want to betray your memory," she whispered. Into the empty room, a tear slipped down, staining the wood. Yet in her mind rose James's eyes, storm gray, unwavering, as though he truly believed she could love again. By midnight, the sea pounded like a heartbeat against the shore. Hannah pulled the curtains, exhaling deeply. She knew if she drove to Gull's Point at dawn, her life would shift. If she didn't, the story would close, like all the nights before her world sealed, unchanged. But her heart cracked, though it was whispered, a question her mind refused to. What if this was her last chance to find family again? Dawn laid a silver veil over the point. The ocean breathed its cold mist across Hannah's face as she parked beside the field of wildflowers. The horizon glowed faintly, like a stroke of pencil across pale paper. Above, gulls cried sharp and thin against the wind. James was already there. The black SUV rested by the line of pines. He stood inside a wooden A-frame skeleton, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the steel watch gleaming faintly in the early light. The mystery of the night before had burned away with the sunrise. What remained was clarity and honesty. Coffee. He lifted a thermos. Black. No sugar. My guess. Hannah accepted. Warmth slipping into her fingers. They stood side by side, facing the sea before them. Wooden stakes marked the outline of a foundation. Ropes stretched taut, straight and uncompromising. Resin, fresh-cut wood, and sea salt mingled on the air. "When did you start?" she asked. Before dawn, he gestured toward the cliff edge, where boards lay stacked. "I needed to hear the ocean first. It tells me the rhythm." She glanced at him. In his eyes was a strange calm, the kind carried only by those who had walked through a long night and learned how to live with shadows. He handed her a hard hat new, clean, with a strip of tape neatly marked age. "I don't take personal gifts from strangers," she said, but still slipped it on. James didn't smirk. He simply set another stake, tying the rope firm. "I don't bring luxuries. I bring what works. A home begins with that. You seem comfortable with foundations," she teased, half serious. "I used to stand on towers of glass and steel." He paused, his gaze fixed on the rope. "But a home has to rise from the ground, and it has to stand for things you can't see. Memory, silence, tears." The words pierced Hannah like a small needle. She turned away, staring at the ocean, trying to hide the ache rising in her throat. "To mask it?" she asked quickly. And what does family mean to you? Then define it. Like a CEO signing a contract, James pulled the pencil from behind his ear, clipped it to the edge of a beam, as if to sign with fate itself. Family means there's a hook by the door with your name on it, a drawer in the kitchen no one opens but you, a window low enough for a child to lean on and say, "Tonight the sea is silver." Family means you can cry without explanation, and it means I don't leave even when the numbers call my name. Hannah's eyes stung. She lowered her voice. I can't promise to love you. I can only promise this morning. And the truth. James turned toward her, the first light striking his cheek like honey. I don't need forever today. I just need truth today. The rest we build. A gust swept across the cliff, the ropes humming like strings of a violin. James placed a hammer in her hands. You drive the first nail. If you want to stop, we stop here. No one pays for my choice. Her fingers trembled. Before her lay a small silver nail, gleaming, waiting. She closed her eyes, listening to the sea, listening to her heart. When the hammer fell, the strike rang clean, sharp, like breaking through a fear held too long. James didn't cheer. He simply stood near, close enough to steady, far enough to respect. Overhead, gulls cut a white arc through the golden dawn. The second nail, he asked. Hannah opened her eyes. A thin smile curved her lips, fragile but real. The second nail, the morning light, stretched wider, spilling gold over the wet grass and rising frame. The hammer sang against wood, echoing with the waves below. Hannah's hand still shook, but her eyes grew steadier. Each strike was not just a step in building walls, but a test of whether she could lay her faith back down, piece by fragile piece. James watched without interfering. When she paused, breath unsteady, he handed her a clean cloth. Hands can't shake when you set a foundation, but sometimes shaking means you're alive. She wiped her palms, voice rough. I never thought I'd be doing this, not after everything. James met her gaze, his reply slow. Certain, neither did I. But ruins are only tests. Hannah, the question isn't what we lost, but what we choose to build on the ruins. Her throat tightened. The ocean wind lashed against her face, salty and sharp. She turned away, hiding the wet shine in her eyes. But James had already seen. He didn't press. He simply rested his rough hand against the beam beside them, steady, gentle. You really believe I could help you build a family? She whispered, the words breaking like a confession. She hadn't meant to speak aloud. James stepped closer, his storm gray eyes locked into hers. I don't need perfect. I need someone who knows loss and is still brave enough to love again. Her breath hitched, Her heart ached not with old pain, but with something warmer, a stirring of life, of possibility, and in that moment, with the sea roaring, the gulls calling, and the hammer still echoing in the air, James's voice carved itself into the morning. Hannah, from this first nail, I promise I'll build not just a house, but a place where your heart can finally rest. Her lips trembled, a tear slid free, yet she smiled a fragile, shining smile and nodded. The eastern sky flamed gold, washing the sea with light. And there, at the edge of Gull's Point, a strange promise between a wealthy CEO and a small-town widow was laid into the foundation, not just of a home, but of a family waiting to rise. Part 2. The Wooden Gifts. By late afternoon, the seaside frame glowed beneath the fading sun. The A-shaped beams stretched tall like ship masts, taut ropes, cutting clean lines against the pink sky. Wind carried the mingled scents of pine resin and salt, scattering sawdust like sparks of light across the new boards. Hannah arrived with a wicker basket, a chicken pot pie still warm in its tin, a jar of pickled cucumbers, and a thermos of creamy mushroom soup. She set it down on a folding pine table and glanced up. James was sanding the surface of a wooden bench, his calloused hands moving with even strokes. Beneath the dust, the steel watch still circled his wrist, a small reminder that he once lived by deadlines and pressure. I brought supplies, Hannah said, her voice lighter than she felt. James looked up, his storm gray eyes softened. Thank you, out here. Warmth always comes before blueprints. They sat across from each other, the breeze carrying the aroma of pie between them. James ate slowly, as though respecting the hands that had made it. Then his phone buzzed. The screen flashed. Seattle board urgent. He stared for one heartbeat, then silenced it, flipped the phone face down. Hannah caught the glance. A CEO. Ignoring the word urgent, she teased, half joking, I'm not ignoring it. He wiped his hands on a cloth. Voice calm, I'm choosing which urgent thing matters in this moment. And right now, this bench's foundation needs me more than a meeting that won't change a thing. Simple words, yet something in his tone brushed against Hannah's heart. She poured soup into a cup, handed it to him, and watched the way he breathed in the steam shoulders, loosening as though he'd set down an invisible burden. When the food was cleared, James pulled a small bundle from a wooden crate. Unwrapping the cloth, he revealed a keychain carved from pale maple into the shape of a lighthouse. At the base was a tiny letter H etched into the grain that curved like waves. I'm not good at saying thank you, he said, placing it in her palm. So I make things, useful things, Someday, if you ever have a key to something of your own again, you'll need this." The words hit Hannah deep. A key to something of your own. For 3 years, her old keychain had sat untouched in a wooden box the day she returned the keys to their house. Her chest tightened. She clutched the little lighthouse, warm, as though it had been carved straight from his heart. "And if I lose it," she asked, voice husky, "then I'll make another." James replied, simple, as if he were talking about replacing a beam. "Objects can be replaced. People can't." A strong gust swept through. The last streaks of sunlight fell through the unfinished frame, gilding the lighthouse charm in her hand. Hannah swallowed hard and nodded. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something unlock quietly inside. Sunday morning, the farmer's market brimmed with scents of fresh bread, bright apples piled high, and bouquets rustling in newspaper wraps. Hannah paused at a flower stall. Yellow tulips glowed like drops of sunlight. She realized it had been years since she'd bought flowers for herself. "You're the first this week to pick tulips." The vendor smiled. "They bloom quickly, but they fade fast. Most people choose something that lasts longer." Hannah brushed a petal, remembering the maple vase James had left on her doorstep days ago empty, but catching the light as though waiting for something. She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll take the whole bunch." That afternoon, she carried the tulips to the construction site. The sea wind blew hard, wood dust mixing with resin. James was on a ladder, hammering the final braces of a window that faced the ocean. Hearing her steps, he turned. Sweat soaked his flannel. His hair wind-swept, but his eyes brightened at the sight of the flowers for the new window. He asked, voice hoarse from work. Hannah smiled faintly, handing him the vase and the tulips. He placed them carefully inside, then set the vase on the raw wooden sill where the last rays of daylight poured in. The yellow petals blazed like fire among drifting sawdust. He stood still, watching as though in ceremony. Then, almost in a whisper, This is the first true brick of this house." The words caught Hannah off guard. She gave a small laugh to steady herself. "They're just flowers." "No." James shook his head, eyes still on the window. "This is what makes a house different from a pile of wood. Breath, color, memory, and it comes from you." The silence stretched. Hannah's heart pulled tight. Old scars aching, yet loosening, just enough to let the light seep in. His words weren't flirtation. They were a contract without paper. "You've laid your foundation here." She turned away, hiding sudden tears. But inside, the ocean's roar sounded different, like a harmony with her racing heartbeat. Evening fell slowly. Mist spread across the site like sugar dusting cocoa. The generator hummed low, hammer strikes quieted, and the scent of cinnamon and butter drifted with the wind. Hannah appeared with a tray of fresh cinnamon rolls, their glazed tops gleaming, payment for the master builder. She teased, setting them down. James set aside his plane, washed at the makeshift sink, dried with coarse cloth. He tore one roll, steam curling upward, his gray eyes softening as though he'd been given permission to breathe. His phone buzzed again. Investor call 5 mean. He glanced, then switched it to airplane mode. "You're not taking it?" Hannah asked, surprised. "Out here, the only thing worth investing is presence." His words were simple, not gallant, but a principle. Heat spread inside Hannah, different from any fire. She poured warm milk into 2 mugs, and they sat on the temporary steps, the tulips glowing in the window above them. The breeze carried cinnamon through the unfinished halls, brushing against every beam like comfort. James rose for a moment, then returned with a small linen bundle. He set it in her hands. Inside lay a maple photo frame, smooth as a child's skin. The joints dovetailed with precision. On the top edge, he'd carved a tiny horizon line. Hannah tilted it and found a hidden slot in the back. Tucked inside was a pencil sketch, a strip of sea, 2 small birds, a wide, empty sky. "You can put a photo in when you're ready," James said softly. "Until then, the horizon can hold the space." Her breath caught. For 3 years, every frame in her apartment faced the wall, and here was a frame that allowed her not to be ready, that left room for breathing. How did you know?" Her voice was rough, because there were days I couldn't look either. James admitted. "So I looked at the horizon. It reminded me there was still a way forward." A gust shook the tarp overhead, flooding the frame with golden light. Hannah pressed it to her chest, a small gesture, yet almost a confession. A tear fell, striking the carved line. "Thank you for not asking me to rush." James only nodded. He didn't wipe her tears. He simply stayed near enough so she knew she wasn't alone. Beyond the sight, waves crashed, then softened, like a heart relearning steady rhythm. Later, a storm wind rose, flinging salt spray high against the frame. Hannah climbed the wooden steps, carrying her little metal box of bandages and antiseptic habit. More than foresight, James was on the scaffolding, bracing a heavy plank against the gust. The wood slipped, slicing into his palm. Blood welled instantly. He grimaced, but steadied the board, managing a strained smile. "I'm fine. The only real danger here is forgetting a helmet." "Fine." Hannah's heart leapt. "Get down. Now." He obeyed, dropping lightly to the sand, letting her pull him onto the step. She cleaned the wound, wrapped it with sure hands. His skin was hot, strong, trembling faintly under her touch. The air smelled of blood, pine, and sea salt. They said nothing, only listening to the surf. James's eyes never left her face. Its profile bent in concentration. Hannah felt the weight of his gaze, but kept her focus steady, knotting the bandage tight. Then she looked up. You have to be more careful. Building a house doesn't mean shedding blood. His smile was faint, deep. Sometimes a small wound reminds us we're alive and that someone still cares enough to mend it. The words struck her tender core. How long had it been since her hands touched someone out of care and trembling fear? Tears pressed forward. She turned away, fussing with the box. James rose quietly, then placed something small into her hand, a tiny wooden spoon, smooth and curved, with a wave carved into the handle. For the days you make soup for your patients, he murmured. So you remember, someone is always tasting with you, even if only in imagination. Hannah closed her fingers around it, the warmth of his wound still imprinted. Her eyes blurred, words failed. The sea wind roared, dissolving the last defenses. Twilight draped gold over the frame. The ocean shifted from steel to amber, waves whispering against the rocks. Hannah and James sat against the beams, the tulips still standing proud in the window above them. Pine, salt, and cinnamon mingled in the air. James's phone buzzed again. Seattle Board Review. In 30 need you on. The screen lit, then dimmed. He stared, as if at a closing door. One world of glass towers, another of salt wind and sawdust. Then he set it face down. You can go, Hannah whispered, almost ashamed of giving permission. If I leave now, James said, voice steady, what I miss isn't a meeting. It's this moment and everything it could become. The wind tugged Hannah's sweater close. She stared at the sea, throat tight with a truth she'd buried for years. My husband died on an evening like this. I put away every photo frame because I couldn't stand the sunset. Each dusk, I felt locked outside a home with no key. James listened without interrupting, his bandaged hand resting on his knee like a silent vow. Hannah drew a long breath. I thought that was it, that I'd live like that forever. Work, go home, count the waves, never stop, never open a door, silence. Then James shifted, reaching for another linen bundle. Inside was a small wooden drawer, its front carved with a delicate H, the handle worn brass. He held it out. This is a prototype, he explained. The Hannah drawer. You'll choose where it belongs. By the door for your keys, under the counter for the spoon, anywhere you want to return to. Once it's built in, no one can remove it without weakening the frame. The words pierced her center, the thought of a space with her name not in documents or offices, but in the very bones of a house brought heat to her eyes. And if one day I'm not brave enough, she whispered, then it stays. James said quietly, the house will hold it for you until you come back. She cradled the drawer against her chest. Unlike the box of memories she once clung to, this one leaned forward. Toward the future, she pointed to the left wall, where sunset touched at hand's height. There, so every time I come home, I'll remember to open it first. James nodded. Tomorrow, I'll carve the slot. It'll slide smooth like the house saying, welcome home. Hannah, shuffle, her eyes glistened. Don't be so kind. I can't defend myself. I'm not good at attacking, James said with a faint, rueful smile. I only know how to build. If a wall is needed, I'll raise one. If a window is needed, I'll cut it. And if a drawer is needed for what you can't yet say, I'll place the Hannah drawer right there. The last light slipped beneath the horizon, leaving a wash of faded orange. Hannah reached out, almost without thinking, resting her hand over his bandaged palm. Does it hurt? Yes, he said honestly. But pain is less frightening than emptiness. The answer closed the last fragile gap between them. In the hush of waves, they sat as though guarding something newly laid into the earth, a gift of wood, a drawer with her name, and the fragile beginnings of trust. Far off, the glass chime rang faintly in the wind. James's phone lit once more, then died. Neither of them looked. Instead, they listened to the waves, to their breathing, and to the living rhythm of a house slowly becoming more than timber. A house that could breathe, a house that could wait, a house that could keep a place for coming home. Part 3. The Man from the City. That night, Gull's Point Town Hall glowed brighter than usual. The old wooden benches had been wiped until they shone. A white screen hung against the wall, and the projector hummed like a tired insect. The air smelled of pine, rain-soaked coats, and ocean salt. Hannah sat in the middle row beside Mrs. Dawson and the Price couple. At the back, James leaned against a column, his hands clasped behind him, storm-gray eyes scanning the ceiling beams as though checking their strength. Then the doors opened. Richard Garrett entered like a polished arrow, a silver-gray tailored suit, black leather shoes gleaming, tie knotted with surgical precision. His secretary wheeled in a small cart laptop, clicker, water bottle angled exactly 45 degrees. The screen flickered to life, coastal horizons revitalizing Gull's Point. Letters slid smoothly across as piano music played, thin and sharp as a blade. Ladies and gentlemen, Garrett began, smiling with the cadence of a man who had conquered countless boardrooms. We are here to bring opportunity, new jobs, modern infrastructure, a marina, a high-class shopping district. Your properties will rise in value. Gull's Point will step into the future. Every word opportunity, value, future dropped onto the wooden floor like shining coins. A few younger residents clapped politely, but Hannah felt Mrs. Dawson's shoulder tremble beside her. The old woman's fingers clutched her shawl so tightly the knuckles went white. Across the aisle, retired fisherman Tim Harris stared down at his rough hands, thumb rubbing the worn band of his wedding ring. Garrett clicked. Images filled the screen. Glossy redwood decks, endless glass, palm trees, lined like soldiers. Beautiful, but wrong. Too foreign for this town. Of weathered white houses and unlocked doors, where wind chimes sang, and neighbors walked through without knocking. By rise in value, Hannah raised her hand, her voice calm, but carrying, "You mean property taxes will rise as well?" Garrett's smile never faltered. Of course, all growth comes with adjustments, but we have support packages for those who wish to seize the opportunity early. Seize. The word stung. In medicine, seizing meant pressure, forcing a patient into choices they never wanted. From the back, James shifted, his jaw tightening. Hannah glanced and caught his eye. He stood still, steady as a breakwater, measuring the wind, the weight, the breaking points in the room. "Our old harbor?" asked Lucas, the sawmill owner. "It will be restructured," Garrett replied smoothly. "Safer, more beautiful, more profitable." Profitable. The word cut Hannah's chest. She thought of her patients, their pills, their weary legs needing low steps, not sensor-driven glass doors. Garrett's final slide flashed. 2 words. "Welcome home." The room clapped out of politeness, not conviction. Hannah felt as though someone had set a wet stone on her chest. Mrs. Dawson leaned close, whispering like a child lost. "If taxes rise, dear, can I still hold on?" Hannah clasped her hand, firm. "You won't be alone." The lights flickered, plunging the hall half into shadow. For an instant, Hannah heard only her heartbeat and the faint brush of James's hand against the back of her chair. A silent signal, "I'm here." The applause faded. Garrett stepped off the stage, moving with the ease of a man, confident he already owned the room. His platinum watch caught the light a mark of city power, but unease spread. Murmurs rippled like cold wind through the damp hall. "Mr. Garrett," Tim Harris rasped, "I don't need a marina. I need the wooden house my father built, the shore where my boy still mends his nets. You'd turn it into a bar." Garrett's smile held. "We optimize space. Each family will receive fair compensation. Trust me, you'll have a cleaner, more modern, far more valuable home. Optimize. Compensate. Words sharp as scalpels. Hannah's stomach knotted. She pictured the community clinic replaced with a sterile spa. Where would her patients go? Where would the elders lean their canes? An old woman rose, hands trembling but voice fierce. We don't want modern homes. We want our homes. A ripple, like the first surge of a wave. Garrett tilted his head. That is only the usual fear of change. Trust me, once it's built, you'll be proud. At the back, James stepped forward, tall, silent. The wooden floor seemed to steady beneath each stride. For the first time, Garrett faltered just a flicker before returning to his polished act. We have strategic partners from Seattle, Garrett announced, voice booming like a final strike. Respected investors who understand Gull's Point's value. The slide glowed with company names, one in bold, Silverton Holdings. Hannah's heart stuttered. She turned to James. His jaw was locked, his bandaged hand tense at his pocket. A whisper darted through the crowd. Silverton. Isn't that James? All eyes swung toward him, curious, suspicious, disappointed. Mrs. Dawson's gaze pleaded silently. Did you know? James straightened, his storm gray eyes fixed on Garrett. He didn't explain. His silence carried the weight of steel. Hannah's chest tightened. The man who had carved her gifts of wood, who spoke of family and home, was now caught in the shadow of the very corporation threatening to erase them. Lucas, the sawmill owner, stood, voice rough but resolute. Marshall, you said you were building a home, but is your money standing behind him? We deserve the truth. James stepped forward, light catching his bandaged hand. His words landed heavy, one by one. No, I do not invest in coastal horizons. I do not work for Silverton. I cut every tie years ago. Garrett's chuckle slid through the air. He lifted his clicker like a knife. Yet public records show a J. Marshall, Seattle, once listed as technical advisor for a Silverton project. Transparency. Mr. Marshall, this town deserves it. The crowd murmured. Doubt thickened. Hannah felt Mrs. Dawson squeeze her hand tighter. Her own pulse raced. Say it. James, say the truth. James's gaze never left Garrett. I once lived in that world. I severed it after the day I lost everything. If my name appears now, it is borrowed, not signed by me. Murmurs swelled. A young cafe owner challenged, half wary, half bold. Words are cheap. What proof do you have? James nodded. Prepared. From his pocket, he drew folded papers. He spread them. This is the land use covenant for the Callahan property. I filed it this morning, legally binding. I will not sell or transfer to any commercial developer for at least 10 years, and a portion is dedicated to public community space. The words community space struck Hannah's heart like a bell. But Garrett only laughed thin and cutting. A slip of paper can't fight money. Every covenant can be adjusted. Don't let sentiment cloud value. This time, James turned fully toward him. His voice dropped, not to softness, but to the iron register of boardrooms where billions turned on a breath. You measure everything in price. I hold by value. Gull's point is not a balance sheet. This is their home. The room hushed. Hannah's eyes burned. Images of his gifts. Flashed wooden spoon. Empty frame. Hannah's drawer. Each one proof of the vow he now spoke aloud. An old fisherman rose, voice cracking with age. My son doesn't need a marina. He needs a shore, and I need the wind chime on my porch each night. If Marshall says true, then I choose to believe him. Silence spread, not of fear, but of ground cracking to let roots through. Garrett placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, smile sharpened. Sometimes the best way to honor your home is to leave it, so you may gain more. The words chilled Hannah. She stood, meeting his gaze. Leaving the place that raised you is its own wound. No payout heals that. For a heartbeat, Garrett's eyes turned cold. The room seemed to tighten like air before a storm. At the back, James clenched his bandaged fist, his gaze locking on Hannah's gratitude and pain in equal measure. He drew a breath, bracing for the next wave. Lightning cracked outside. Thunder rolled. Rain hammered the windows. Inside, the hall thickened with storm. Garrett raised his voice above it all. I understand your fears, but think bigger. Gull's point is just a dot on the map. We must step into a new era. I am not here to take away. I am here to bring opportunity. The word opportunity struck like a hammer. The room erupted, voices clashing, some resisting, some wavering. Hannah saw Mrs. Dawson bow her head, lips moving in prayer. Then James stepped forward. Not beside Garrett, not among the townsfolk between them. His voice rang deep, clear, carrying over the storm. Without a microphone, I know those slides look beautiful. I lived in that world. I approved projects like this by the dozens, thinking I was giving people a future, but what I left behind were towns without memories, families without porches, communities reduced to names on a file. The hall fell still, the storm outside roaring like witness. Hannah saw not just the ash gray of his eyes, but the weight of regret filling them. He drew breath again. I walked away from Silverton the day I realized I had lost the one thing money can't buy, belonging, and I swear, if I build another home, it will be to return that, not to take it away. Tears blurred Hannah's vision. His wooden gifts small, quiet were vows embodied, and now he had spoken them before all. One clap sounded, then another. Soon, the hall filled with applause, neighbors rising, faces weathered by sea and time, standing for James, not for a CEO, but for a man brave enough to confess his failure and stand firm in truth. Garrett's smile faltered. He clicked, but the slide remained frozen on welcome home mockery now. In that moment, Hannah caught James's eyes. He didn't smile, but he nodded once through rain, through thunder, through applause. A vow, unspoken. I stand with them, with you. Outside, rain sheeted the parking lot, turning the sodium lights into bitter pools of honey. The town hall emptied, voices trailing into the storm. James leaned against his black SUV, breath clouding the air. He waited until the last villager left habit of a man who always stayed behind, picking up the silence left after the crowd. Well played. Garrett's voice cut through the rain. He appeared beneath the eaves, umbrella black, platinum watch, glinting cold. Your speech on value over price, better than I remembered. James didn't turn. You never remembered right. I remember Seattle, Garrett said, stepping through puddles without a splash. He stopped at boardroom distance. And I remember one afternoon, 17, a concrete pour collapse. The air snapped taut. Rain hissed like wires. James's bandaged hand gripped the car roof hard. You came here to exhume graves. His voice was low, flat as the sea before a whirlpool. Garrett smiled his perfect smile. I came to negotiate. You hold Callahan land. I want it, and I don't mind. Circling around, from his pocket, he produced a thin white envelope. County planning has friends. So does building inspection. Half a dozen reports. Could fall on your site any day. A stop work order for erosion risk. A reassessment that raises your neighbor's taxes until she sells, or you sign here. Conditional transfer. I'll let you keep your symbol, your community playground. The press will adore it. You keep your halo. I get the rest. Everybody wins. Rain hammered the umbrella. James saw again that other sky that afternoon of twisted steel, choking dust, screams. 17. The word cut like a knife. You know what the worst is. Garrett lowered his voice, pressing closer. Not a collapse. A name, repeated in every report. A photo of you, holding two tiny coats. Muti. I only need to show that. And this town will know James Marshall can't lay a foundation for anyone. The knife struck deepest. James closed his eyes for one heartbeat, then opened them, calm as stone. You're wrong, Garrett. I lost everything, which is why I know now what must never be lost. You're choosing war. Garrett's smile finally slipped. I'm choosing home, James said. His voice did not rise, but it struck like iron. And this home is not for sale. A long pause. Then Garrett exhaled, sliding the envelope back into his pocket. A short laugh. Brittle. Very well. I hope your nurse enjoys storms. She looks fragile. James straightened, stepped forward, voice colder than the rain. Touch her, and you'll hear 3 bells toll in Gull's Point. You won't forget them. For half a second, Garrett's mask cracked, anger flashing. Then he opened the umbrella and turned away. See you soon. Marshall, in court, or on the front page. The black umbrella vanished into the rain. James leaned back against the car, his hand pressed against his chest, where an old wound still lived. The sodium lamps cast the wet pavement in bitter honey light, and through the storm, faint and far, he thought he heard the glass wind chime from Gull's Point's cliff, a reminder home is where people stand together against the storm. That night, rain hammered until midnight. Gull's Point lay under a wet, restless veil, street lamps flickering like molten steel. The town had dispersed, but the weight of the meeting lingered on porches and behind curtained windows. People returned to their homes, carrying doubt and hope in equal measure, as though stepping onto a road that could lead to ruin or renewal. In the small room behind the clinic, Hannah sat at her window, cradling a cold cup of tea. Her eyes followed James's figure as he passed in the rain, his back dark, strong, yet heavy, like a rock holding the tide. Garrett's words echoed cruelly. Your nurse looks fragile, half threat, half bleed. Hannah's chest tightened. She had never seen James reveal himself so openly, only to be dragged back by shadows of his past. The contrast broke her heart. Her fingers traced the wooden frame he'd given her, the grain rough beneath her touch. It reminded her of the only truth that mattered. He had chosen to stay. He had chosen home. At the edge of town, Garrett sat in a black sedan, phone at his ear, voice cold as steel. Prepare the files, the project and the man. Gull's Point will open, whatever the cost. Keyboard clatter echoed faintly. Garrett smiled, eyes glinting like ice as he watched the rain-slick streets. To him, this town was no more than a pawn. That night, the ocean roared fierce, waves striking the rocks like warnings, and under that storm, Gull's Point drifted into uneasy sleep, not knowing whether morning would bring sunrise or another battle. Part 4. The photograph from the past. The makeshift room beside the timber frame carried the faint scent of pine resin, with wood shavings still scattered across the floor. Outside, the rhythm of hammers echoed, saws screeched in steady intervals, and far beyond, the endless murmur of waves whispered like a lullaby with no end. Hannah stepped inside, carrying a basket of warm lunch. James wasn't there. Only a rough wooden table stood in the middle. crowded with design sketches, rulers, and a stack of folders. She meant to set the basket down and leave, but her eyes froze on a slip of paper jutting out from beneath the drawings. It wasn't another sketch. It was a yellowed piece of newspaper, the ink blurred from water stains. With hesitant fingers, she pulled it free. The paper was folded tight, edges stuck together, as though it had been buried long at the bottom of a file box. When she opened it, her heart seized. A black and white photograph stared back. Garrett in a light-colored suit, smiling broadly, shaking hands with a tall man in black James. Beneath it, the headline read, "Silverton Holdings launches $200 million West Coast project. Garrett Vaughn and strategic advisor James Marshall signed the deal." Hannah's hand trembled as she dropped the paper, as if it had burned her. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. Her eyes swept over another line. Marshall, chief engineer, strategic architect, a key figure in restructuring efforts. Each word struck like a hammer blow against the fragile trust she had begun to build. She collapsed into a wooden chair, staring at the photo. Two worlds collided inside her. The James who carved wooden gifts for her, who once held her hand with honest eyes, and the James in that photograph standing beside Garrett, the very man threatening to steal Gull's point. The door creaked open. James stepped in, sawdust clinging to his shoulders. Surprise flickered across his face when he saw Hannah, and then his gaze fell to the newspaper in her hand. "Hannah!" His voice rasped. Her grip tightened on the paper, her eyes never leaving the photograph. "What is this?" "James." At that moment, the wind outside lashed against the building, rattling the door on its hinges. Hannah heard the sound of her heart breaking, sharp and splintered, like old timber snapping in the storm. The photograph had laid bare the truth, cold as a blade, slicing deep into the fragile trust she had dared to place in him. James froze, his eyes fixed on the paper, as though it were a knife at his throat. His face, once steady and calm, was taut now, the streak of sawdust on his cheek, making him look like a man stripped bare before the light of his past. Hannah drew a shuddering breath, her shoulders trembling. Her voice was low but unyielding. "You worked with Garrett, not just worked. You signed Silverton's project with him. So everything you said at the town hall, every promise you swore, was it all just a performance?" James took one step toward her, then stopped, his hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. His words fell heavy, like stones hitting the floor. "Hannah, yes, I once stood beside him. I once signed those papers, and even now, every time I remember, I feel my blood run cold." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then you lied. It was all a lie." James shook his head violently. his voice breaking out like a cry. "No, I never lied to you. I hid the truth. Yes, but not to deceive you. I didn't have the courage to face my old wounds." His gaze drifted to the photo in her hand. There he was, younger, confident, gripping Garrett's hand like two men ready to build an empire. Back then, I believed bigger meant better. Garrett had the vision, I had the plans, the skills. We were a perfect pair. And then, that day came. The building collapsed. 7 men died. Garrett walked away with lawyers and money. And me, I stood in front of their families, holding 2 small shirts, unable to find words big enough to ask for forgiveness. Hannah's breath caught. The fragments she had heard before the name 17, the faraway look in James's eyes whenever he saw a building sway in the wind, now pieced together into a bloody picture. She slowly laid the paper down, and you thought, coming to Gull's point, building a house would erase all that. James bowed his head. A drop fell from his hair onto the floor, but Hannah knew it wasn't seawater. His voice was hoarse, stripped bare. "No, I know it'll never disappear. I just wanted, for once in my life, to build something, not to sell, not to measure in profit, but to keep, to call it home." In his eyes, Hannah saw the raw truth of a man, once a CEO on a pedestal, now trembling like a sinner, begging for one more chance to be believed. Yet inside her, a crack had opened wide. To trust or not was the cruelest verdict of all. The air thickened, heavy as the sawdust that lingered in every corner. Hannah stood motionless, hands clasped tightly. His words echoed through her, stabbing her chest with every beat. She turned toward the window, where beams of wood were still rising outside. Each hammer strike echoed like a heartbeat, pounding against the chaos inside her. "I don't know." Her voice shook. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." "James!" He moved closer, desperation in his eyes. "Hannah, please." She stepped back, shaking her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You told the town you'd build this house to give them belonging. But have you thought, that photograph, your past, it will turn everything into a mockery. They'll look at me and think I was foolish to believe in a man who once walked beside Garrett." The words struck James like a blow to the chest. He reached out, but she turned away. "I lost my husband to a storm at sea." "James!" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I forced myself to stand, to survive, to make a living at the clinic. I cannot, I will not hand my heart to another storm." That sentence cut the fragile thread between them. Hannah walked out, the wooden door closing with a hollow thud. James stood frozen. On the table, the old newspaper lay open, his past self still smiling. hand clasped with Garrett, mocking the man he was now, trembling, alone. Without an anchor, he dropped into a chair, his eyes hollow, staring at nothing. Outside, waves crashed against the rocks with a violence that sounded like judgment from the past, drowning him all over again. Hannah pressed a hand to her chest as she hurried across the windswept ground. The sea, tearing at her hair, drying her tears before they reached her chin. In that moment, she wanted both to turn back and hold him, and to run far away. Trust had been torn apart, and her heart once again fell into emptiness. She reached the seawall path, the salt-heavy wind stinging her eyes, stopping beneath the awning of Mrs. Dawson's cafe. She saw the warm yellow glow spilling out through the mist. Hannah, the older woman's voice, called softly. Slim, silver-haired, a dishcloth still in her hand. She stepped out. "Where are you going in this wind?" "Child." Hannah sank onto the wooden step, hugging her knees. The tears she had held back burst forth, salty as the sea. "Mrs. Dawson, I just found out. James, he once stood with Garrett. They were partners. I believed him, believed every word. But now, I don't know what I'm holding on to anymore." The woman sighed, easing herself down beside her, patting her shoulder gently. "I know." Hannah looked up in shock. "You knew?" The old woman nodded, eyes gazing out at the dark sea. "Years ago, when the collapse made the news, I remember reading the name James Marshall. I didn't think a man carrying such a scar would ever come to Gull's Point. But then I saw him tie a boy's loose shoelace, haul timber to mend old Mabel's roof. Hannah, pain, like his only leaves, two roads. It destroys you, or it teaches you to love deeper." Fresh tears streamed down Hannah's cheeks, but softer now. But Garrett, he knows. He could expose James any time, and then no one will believe again. Mrs. Dawson laid a hand over hers, squeezing. "They can take honor with ink, but they cannot take the truth from your own eyes. Hannah, you are the first person James has let see who he really is. Don't close your heart before the storm has passed." Hannah sat in silence, torn in two. One side, the photograph, a cruel truth. The other, the testimony of a kind old woman, and the quiet deeds that proved James was no longer the man in that picture. Outside, the waves kept breaking, but a sliver of moonlight pierced through the clouds, sketching a silver path across the water, just enough to guide, not enough to show the end. Back in the wooden shack, James sat alone. The lamp cast a weak glow, stretching his shadow across the wall, long and distorted, like a giant brought low. On the table, the newspaper lay open, his younger face smiling up, a reminder sharp as a blade. His hand shook as he lifted it, then let it fall. He closed his eyes, and the memories surged, suffocatingly vivid. A sweltering summer noon, the skyscraper in Seattle reeking of fresh cement. Garrett, radiant in a pale suit, stood on the balcony with shareholders, smiling. James, younger, ambitious, walked the 17th floor, inspecting progress. Then a dry explosion. The main column shuddered. In seconds, everything collapsed. Screams, the shriek of snapping steel, white dust swallowing the sky. James remembered dragging 2 men out, only to see a massive slab bury 7 others before his eyes. He looked up through the chaos. Garrett was gone. Days later, headlines praised Garrett as the courageous leader who handled crisis, while James's name sank to the footnotes. He covered his face, his chest clenched, as if gripped by an iron fist. The 7 dead haunted his nights, alongside the memory of 2 tiny shirts he once carried to grieving families. The apology caught in his throat, too small to mean anything. The wind howled through the cracks, snapping him back. He whispered, to himself, to Hannah, maybe to both, "I've paid the price. I lost my career, my family, even myself. The only thing I can do now is build one house. Not for me, for those who never had a place to call home." His voice was raw, but his eyes were dry. He rose, gripping the blueprint. Outside, the waves still pounded the shore, relentless, violent, yet the very rhythm that kept the town alive. And in the dim light, though James looked like a broken man, a faint spark lit in his eyes, too weak to drive away the dark, but enough to remind him he hadn't surrendered. Part 5. The Invisible Grip. Gull's Point had always been a quiet place, its white-painted cottages framed with bougainvillea blossoms spilling over verandas, and the sea's song rising and falling like a cradle hymn of the earth itself. But now, laughter had been replaced by whispers of worry, and the sweet smell of fresh bread in the air had given way to a creeping fear that seeped into every home. Garrett no longer confined himself to community meetings. He was at people's doors, in their shops, carrying thick folders and wearing a smile so polished it chilled the spine. "Mr. Peterson, I'm sorry to say, but there are issues with your land records. Taxes unpaid for 3 years. If you want to avoid court, the simplest solution is to sell your property to us." Old Peterson, a silver-haired fisherman, clutched the printed sheet in trembling hands. The red-stamped numbers bled across the page like fresh wounds. "But I paid. I've always paid." Garrett's smile widened, cutting him off. "Perhaps you're mistaken. The law doesn't make mistakes, and the court certainly won't." At Rosa's little grocery store, the woman sat hunched behind the counter, as Garrett explained new fees for environmental protection and trade adjustments. Each word was another tightening cord around her neck, squeezing the breath from her lungs. He laid his pen on the counter, his voice smooth as honey but dripping venom. Sell now, and you'll have enough to live comfortably elsewhere. But if you cling on, I fear your shop won't last the winter. Homes, once rooted in memory, were now reduced to numbers on paper. Families who had clung to the sea for generations found themselves trembling before strange legal jargon and endless stacks of regulations. At the corner of the street, Hannah witnessed old Peterson stumble, his cane clattering, eyes wet as he signed his land away. His hand shook so badly the letters twisted across the page. When the pen lifted, the man collapsed into his chair, as though his very spine had broken. Hannah's fists clenched. Her chest tightened. Her tears threatened to spill, not just from sorrow, but from anger. Anger greater than her doubts about James, greater than her fear of Garrett. It was the fury of watching her homeland stolen by invisible chains that bound tighter than any iron shackle. In that moment, James's words returned to her. I only want, once in my life, to build something, not to sell, but to keep. Her heart ached. Perhaps among all the hands pulling things away, his was the only hand trying to hold something in place. That afternoon, Hannah passed Rosa's shop again. The air inside was taut as a drawn bowstring. Garrett sat at the counter, suit immaculate, pen gleaming beside his folder. Rosa sat across from him, her back bent, her eyes vacant. Mrs. Rosa. Garrett cooed, his tone like honey poured too thick. If you sign today, I'll raise the offer by 15%. Enough for a fine apartment in the city. Here, you'll only keep struggling. Standing just outside, Hannah's blood surged hot. She pushed open the door, the bell jangling, sharp against the suffocating silence. Enough. Garrett, his head lifted, the flicker of steel flashing behind his counterfeit smile. Dr. Hannah, what a coincidence. I'm only helping Mrs. Rosa find a brighter future. Her gaze locked on his, her voice steadier than ever before. You call it opportunity. I call it coercion. These people don't know the twisted tax codes you're using. You prey on their ignorance to strip them of the only things they have: homes, shops, memories. Garrett chuckled, leaning forward on the counter, every word sharpened like a blade. The law is the law, doctor. I don't bend it. I apply it. If they can't survive in the new world, moving on is only natural. And you, Hannah, I hear you've taken quite an interest in James's project. Are you sure you're on the right side? The mention of James made her heart falter for a beat, but only a beat. She drew in breath, stepped closer, shielding Rosa with her own body. I'm sure, and I'm also sure of this. Not everyone's conscience is for sale. Garrett's eyes narrowed. The smile faded. Silence pressed against the walls, broken only by the tick of the clock. Slowly, he gathered his folder, rose to his feet. But before he left, he leaned close, his whisper edged with threat. Careful. Doctor, out here, the sea isn't the only thing that can drown a person. The door closed behind him. Rosa broke into sobs, clutching Hannah's hand. Child, if you hadn't been here, I'd have given in. Hannah held her tight, her own eyes burning. Fear and fury swirled in her chest, but beneath them, something new had been kindled, a quiet strength. For the first time, Hannah realized she was no longer standing outside the storm. She was at its center, facing Garrett head on, and her heart was no longer trembling. A small flame had been lit. The next dawn, the fishermen pushed their boats into the mist, as they had for centuries, but when they returned, they weren't met by children's laughter on the sand. Instead, men in black suits awaited them, carrying documents heavy with red stamps. One man, reading with the smoothness of a machine, declared, by new regulations for marine preservation, traditional nets are now banned. Only licensed equipment may be used. Violators will face fines or loss of fishing permits. The crowd erupted. These nets fed our families for generations. Licenses. We've never heard of such things. You're asking us to starve? The official shrugged, smiling faintly. The law is the law. If you wish to continue, speak directly with Mr. Garrett Vaughn. His name dropped like a stone, sinking the harbor into silence. A young fisherman slammed his hand on the boat's hull. This isn't law. This is strangulation. Hannah was there, standing among faces slipping toward despair. Men who had braved storms now shook as they clutched their violation notices, eyes glazed with helplessness. An old man let his worn net slip from his hands, the rope falling into the sand like a piece of his soul stolen away. Garrett didn't need to stand there. His shadow stretched over the town, through every red stamp, every cold line of print. The law had become his invisible net, strangling tighter than the fiercest gale. Hannah stepped forward, her voice trembling, but carrying, "This is wrong. We have to speak, to stand together. If each of us stays silent, the whole town will be swallowed whole." All eyes turned to her. Some nodded, some shook their heads. Fear carved too deep into their bones, but still a spark flickered in the crowd. Hannah saw the gnarled hands of an old fisherman clutching his net, his eyes wet, and in that moment she understood. The true enemy was not only Garrett, but the fear itself, breaking Gull's point one soul at a time. If she did not rise, the town would drown, and then, slow and deliberate, the sound of clapping broke the air. Garrett Vaughn emerged from the far end of the road, his navy suit crisp, his crimson tie slashing through the windswept afternoon like a wound. Two aides carried folders at his side, and a stranger with a camera perched on his shoulder followed close behind. Brilliant. James. Garrett's voice rang out, sharp as a blade hidden in velvet. You've always had the gift of persuasion. I must admit, you perform even better now than back in Seattle. The crowd turned, buzzing like a hive, struck open. The cameraman raised his lens, fixing it squarely on James. Garrett walked forward, his words measured, each one dripping with poison. Yes, you were once mine. Not just once. You were my right hand. You signed the blueprints for the project that collapsed. 7 lives lost. James, 7. And now you stand here playing the hero. James froze. Color drained from his face. The crowd erupted in gasps, whispers, breaking like surf against rocks. Garrett stopped in the center of the square, his voice lowering, slicing into James like a knife pressing an old wound. I wonder if those widows, those fatherless children, knew the man building a home for the community is the same man whose designs buried their loved ones. What would they think? You call this redemption or just a desperate bid to scrub your name clean? Hannah saw James falter, his shoulders shudder, his eyes darken as though the sky within him had collapsed. His past, the wound he tried to bury, had been dragged into the open, raw and bleeding before everyone. And in that instant, he was no longer the strong CEO or the resolute builder, just a broken man standing in the judgment of a crowd. Garrett turned to the villagers, his voice rising. This man is no savior. He is part of the tragedy. And now he wants to drag you into another game just to wash away his sins. The square fell into a deathly silence. Only the surf roared in the distance, frantic as the hearts of Gull's Point. James looked around, his gaze drowning in despair, until it found Hannah. For a moment, his eyes pleaded, "Do you believe me?" Hannah, she bit her lip, tears brimming. Every part of her wanted to run to him, to cry out that he wasn't a monster, but the eyes of the whole town were on them, and her feet felt nailed to the sand. Part 6. Shadows at the harbor. Night fell over Gull's Point, draping the harbor in a silence that felt more like dread than peace. Abandoned warehouses loomed along the shoreline like hollow giants, their rotting beams creaking in the salt wind. The sea crashed against the pilings, carrying with it a sharp brine that stung the tongue, Hannah left her clinic after a long day, planning to stop by the site with bandages for James, knowing he'd still be hammering away at the half-built house. But as she passed the harbor, a figure slipped from the shadows. "Excuse me, Doctor, Mrs." Rosa asked if you could pick up some goods from Warehouse 3. Hannah blinked, startled. Before she could answer, a rough hand clamped down, and a cloth reeking of chemicals smothered her face. Her cry caught in her throat, muffled and strangled. The last thing she heard were the surf pounding harder and the scrape of shoes dragging her across the concrete floor. The iron door slammed shut behind her with the clang of a prison sentence. Darkness swallowed the warehouse, broken only by thin strips of light through cracks in the door, casting pale slivers across dust and forgotten crates. Her wrists bound, she was shoved onto a broken chair. Her heart raced, each beat a drum against her ribs. A figure emerged. The beam of a flashlight cut through the dark and revealed Garrett Vaughn. His smile gleamed, cold as forged steel, his eyes glittering with triumph. "I told you, Doctor. The sea isn't the only thing that can drown someone. Sometimes all it takes is a hostage." Hannah swallowed hard, her voice trembling, but steady. "What do you want from me?" Garrett. He leaned close, his breath icy against her ear. "I want James Marshall, alone. If he doesn't come tomorrow morning, the town will find you on the rocks. A tragic accident." Her eyes squeezed shut, tears threatening to spill. Fear coiled tight around her throat, yet beneath it, a spark flared, not for herself, but for James. She knew Garrett's true target, James's deepest wound. In the dark, she remembered the way James once looked up at her on the worksite, eyes full of sorrow yet lit with hope. She wasn't afraid for her life. She was afraid that if James walked into this trap, the past would kill him all over again. At that very hour, James worked beneath the dim glow of a single lamp, his hammer striking a steady beat. Each blow was a way to drown out the villagers' doubts from earlier that day. Garrett's venomous words still echoing in his skull. His phone buzzed, wiping sweat from his brow. He picked it up. An unknown number. The message read, "If you want Hannah alive, come to Warehouse 3 at the harbor. Alone, midnight, no police. If not, she disappears forever." James froze. Every sound fell away, leaving only the thunder of his heartbeat. His hand shook so violently, the phone nearly slipped from his grasp. "Hannah," he whispered, voice raw. Images crashed through his mind, her gentle smile bringing him lunch, her hands cupping the small wooden gift he made, her tearful eyes whispering, "I believe you, James." Now, she was somewhere in the dark, terrified. Because of him, He staggered back, pressing his palm to his forehead. Garrett's voice echoed in his mind. You already caused 7 deaths. Will you let another one join them? His heart tore in two. Reason screamed, it's a trap. Don't go. But desperation roared louder. If you don't, she dies. He clenched the phone, jaw locked, eyes burning with fierce resolve. No, I won't lose anyone else. Not again. From a drawer, he pulled a small wooden box. Inside lay a ring never given, the last relic of everything he'd lost. He closed his fist around it, whispering a vow. Throwing on his black coat, he left the blueprints and tools behind. His footsteps struck hard against the night as he strode toward the harbor on the mist-soaked road. James thought of his father, once proud, once broken by Garrett's grip. He whispered into the wind, I won't let history repeat. If it costs me everything, I'll keep Hannah safe. By midnight, the harbor was washed in silver haze. Fog curled around the pylons, turning the docks into a labyrinth of shadows. James's boots rang out against damp concrete, each step a tolling bell. Warehouse 3 stood at the end of the row, its rusted door ajar, a sliver of dim light leaking through. James tightened his grip on the phone, throat parched. Hannah. His voice ricocheted off the walls, swallowed by the dark. No answer, only the sea's relentless pounding and the clink of chains in the wind. He pushed the door open. Inside, darkness. The air smelled of rust and mildew, the stacked crates like looming walls. In the far corner, a figure slumped in a chair, wrists bound, hair falling in a curtain across her face. Hannah. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling as he touched her shoulder. It's me. James, can you hear me? Her head lifted, eyes wide, glistening with tears. She whispered, voice breaking, James, you shouldn't have come. His breath caught. He pulled her close, fumbling at the ropes with frantic hands. Shh. I'm here now. No one can hurt you. But just as the knots came loose, the screech of metal ripped the air. James spun. From the shadows, hulking men stepped out, steel pipes in hand, their faces blank as masks. And behind them, Garrett appeared, slow, deliberate, clapping his hands, touching. You never failed to walk right into the snare. James pulled Hannah tighter, eyes blazing with fury, long suppressed. And in that instant, Hannah saw it. A man no longer cowering from his past, but ready to face darkness, even death. Her heart trembled, not just from fear, but from faith that he would never abandon her. Garrett's shoes echoed across the concrete, his smile sharp in the dim yellow glow. James, I always knew you'd throw yourself into the fire for a woman. It's your weakness. And precisely what I need. He nodded, One aide placed a heavy folder on the table, its metal clasp gleaming. Garrett tapped it with a finger, his tone smooth as oil. The land transfer agreement, your signature, and the coastal plots of Gull's Point are mine. The people keep their roofs for a few months, but in the end, everyone leaves. James's jaw tightened. You'd trade Hannah's life for this. Garrett shrugged, smile unflinching. I don't kill, James. I give choices. Sign, and she lives. Refuse. And tomorrow, they'll find her body on the rocks. Hannah writhed against the ropes, her voice hoarse, urgent. Don't. James, if you sign, everyone loses. The men pressed her back down, the cords biting deeper. She gasped in pain. James roared, surging forward, only to be blocked by steel bars. The air thickened, every heartbeat drowned beneath the roar of waves outside. Garrett placed a pen neatly atop the contract, his voice ringing like a gavel. So, James Marshall, will you save the woman you love? Or let her die so you can keep playing the hero? James turned. Hannah's eyes brimmed, but not with pleading, only faith. She shook her head, whispering through tears, don't sell your soul. Don't give Gull's Point to the darkness for me. His chest clenched. She wasn't just the woman he loved. She was the lantern in his storm. James stared at the bold, black print, words like shackles waiting to bind. His hand trembled as he gripped the pen. Behind him, Hannah's broken cry rang out. Don't do it, James. You'll lose everything. Garrett raised an eyebrow, lifting the pen toward him. You've already lost everything. All that remains is her. James seized the pen. His knuckles whitened as the whole room seemed to plunge into silence. His father's haunted eyes flashed in his memory. The villager's words stung again. He was always Garrett's man. And then clack, the pen dropped, unused. James's voice thundered, fierce as the sea itself. I won't repeat my father's mistakes. I won't sell my soul to you ever again. Garrett's smirk faltered. The men tightened their grip on the pipes. James turned to Hannah, his eyes blazing. Hannah, if I die tonight, you'll know at least this. I stood for you. For this town, I will never abandon you. Her tears fell, shimmering in the dim glow. She cried out, broken, James, no. In a single motion, James ripped a wooden chair from the floor and swung it up, blocking the descending pipes. Metal crashed against wood, sparks spitting into the dark. Splinters flew. The roar of waves outside pounded like war drums. And in the chaos, Hannah saw him clearer than ever. James was no longer the man shackled by guilt. He was fighting not just for her, but for his soul. And her heart trembled with terror, with love, with unshakable faith. Part 7. The Alarm Bell. Night pressed down over Gull's Point, thick with fog. The seaside cottages sat hushed, their golden lamplight quivering on rippling water. At the town's center, the ancient bell tower rose like a weary sentinel, bearing silent witness to centuries of storms and survival. James ran along the cobbled road toward the square, his breath ragged, heart pounding, but his steps relentless. After escaping Garrett's trap at the warehouse, he knew one thing: silence would only tighten Garrett's grip. There was but one choice left: wake the entire town. At the base of the tower, Hannah nearly collapsed from exhaustion, but her hand clung tight to his arm. "James, are you sure?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes shimmered with faith. He nodded, gripping her hand firmly, his voice low, steady. "My father once said, 'This bell rings 3 times, only in moments of peril. Tonight, if I don't pull it, everything is lost.'" The sea wind howled, salt sharp on his lips. James turned to Hannah, his gaze heavy with a promise: "No matter what happens, I will protect you." And this place, he pushed open the tower's heavy wooden door. It groaned like an ancient beast awakening, spilling out the smell of dust and damp timber. Inside, a spiral stair climbed upward, twisting like a giant serpent. James began to ascend, each footfall echoing through the hollow chamber, a drumbeat urging him forward. Hannah followed close, clutching her dress to steady her shaking steps. At the summit, the massive bell hung in shadow, rust-stained but solemn. Its thick rope dangled like a cord of fate. James paused, veins standing out as he grasped it. For a moment, he closed his eyes, remembering his father pulling the bell during a violent storm, its toll summoning villagers to save each other from the waves. Hannah's heart trembled as she watched. In that instant, James was no longer a disgraced CEO, no longer a man crushed by his past. He was a beacon, standing tall, the soul of this town, and she knew. She had loved him far longer than she had dared admit. James opened his eyes, voice deep as an oath. "It's time to wake." Gull's Point, he pulled. Bung. The first toll split the night, heavy and resonant, tearing through the fog. He heaved again, muscles burning. Boom! The second peal thundered across Gull's Point. Lights flared in cottages. Windows burst open. Villagers stirred, blinking in disbelief. Old memories stirred. 3 tolls meant only one thing. Their town stood on the edge of ruin. Rosa, wrapping a shawl around her frail shoulders, whispered through trembling lips, "Dear Lord." The alarm bell at a seaside bar. Laughter died mid-sentence. A young fisherman whispered, "It's the signal. Something terrible has come." Bun. The third toll rolled like thunder, shaking roofs and souls alike. The entire town quivered, old and young, women and men, all spilled into the streets, fear and urgency pressing them together. Above them, James sagged with exhaustion, sweat dripping onto the floorboards, but his eyes blazed with fire. Each toll wasn't just a sound, it was a vow. No one would be abandoned again. Behind him, Hannah covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. The bell echoed inside her chest, painful but threaded with hope. Down below, the square filled fast. Villagers streamed from every street, lanterns and tools clutched in hand hammers, shovels, torches. Their anxious whispers thickened into murmurs of resolve. From the distant fog, the lighthouse beam swept slowly across, painting the scene in eerie light. James and Hannah stepped onto the wooden balcony. Their faces were pale, weary, but filled with fierce resolve. An elder raised his voice, trembling, yet strong. James Marshall, what danger rings this bell tonight? This bell only tolls when Gull's Point itself is at stake. Before James could answer, headlights sliced through the fog. Engines growled as sleek black cars rolled into the square. Doors opened. Garrett Vaughn stepped out, coat billowing, flanked by rows of men in dark suits. The air thickened. Whispers fell to silence. Villagers edged back, leaving a hollow space between themselves and Garrett's line. Garrett lifted his gaze, his smile a razor's edge. The same old theatrics, stirring up a crowd with meaningless noise. James, you could ring that bell 1,000 times. It won't change a thing. James straightened, his voice booming like thunder. No, Garrett, this time the bell has woken everyone. You can deceive a man, you can break a family, but you cannot choke a town that's wide awake. A ripple spread through the crowd. A young mother cried out, her voice fierce. We've been silent too long. A middle-aged man raised a rusted hammer high. Gull's Point is not for sale. This is our home. Voices rose, wave upon wave, crashing like the surf. Our home, our home. Hannah's tears spilled as she looked out over them. She had never seen her little town united like this. When James's hand found hers, gripping tight, she knew this moment would never leave her. From the shadows of a warehouse to the blaze of 100 torches, Gull's Point had risen. Garrett strode forward, shoes clicking on the stone steps. He gestured. An aide placed a black case on a table at the center of the square. Garrett opened it, raising a thick file high. You believe in him. Garrett's voice slashed the air. Here's proof contracts, signatures, photographs. James Marshall was mine. He signed off on projects that crushed towns, that left families homeless. Here's the truth. He scattered papers into the air. They fluttered down over the square like damning leaves, landing at villagers' feet. They bent, picked them up, eyes widening at signatures and seals. A man's voice broke, trembling. "James, is it true? Did you do this to other towns?" Suspicion spread like fire in dry grass. Gazes once trusting now wavered, fearful. Garrett's smile curved, pride gleaming. "I don't need tricks. The truth is enough." James Marshall was never a savior. He's a failure. Clinging to his sins, James stood still, torchlight, carving shadows across his weary face. Hannah squeezed his hand, her voice hoarse. "James, don't stay silent. Tell them." He lifted his head, eyes glistening but steady. His voice rang out, not excuse, but confession. "Yes, I signed. I was a coward, chasing money, chasing power. I let Garrett drag me into darkness, and I left scars that can never be erased." The square froze. A cold wind whipped the papers, rustling them across the cobblestones. Hannah's chest ached at his words, raw and unhidden. But in his honesty, she saw something new. Not a man fleeing his past, but one who dared to stand in the open, wounds bared. And in that moment, she loved him more deeply than ever before. The villager's eyes remained fixed, heavy with judgment, waiting. James drew in a long breath, shoulders trembling. Then he lifted his chin, voice firm, splitting the night. "I will not deny my past. I was complicit. I was weak. And I lost everything: my honor, my career, even my faith in myself. But tonight, here in Gull's Point, I swear, I will not let history repeat. I will not allow this town to become another victim of Garrett Vaughn. Not while I live." He turned, staring into Garrett's eyes, fierce as fire. "If Garrett wants this town, he will have to walk over my body first." His voice broke as he faced the villagers again, yet it carried louder. "I do not ask forgiveness, only a chance to stand as your shield. Let me fight for you." A cry rang from the crowd. James, an old fisherman, limped forward, staff in hand, tears on his cheeks. "Your father once rang this bell to save us from the sea. Tonight, you've done what he never lived to do, stood against Garrett. You are no longer his pawn. You are one of us." The murmurs swelled, voices fusing into a roar. "Gull's Point will not bow. We stand together." Garrett staggered back a step, rage flickering in his eyes. He had not expected this surge of defiance. Hannah clung to James, tears mingling with a trembling smile. Love, she realized, was not only in gifts of carved wood or tender touches, but in standing side by side within the storm, vowing to guard what mattered most. This was the love she had never dared believe she'd find. High above, the bell rope still swayed, its final echo lingering in the fog, like a vow etched into the night. Gull's Point had awakened, and from this moment, Garrett Vaughn no longer faced one man. He faced an entire community reborn in faith. Part 8. The Final Confrontation. Night pressed thickly over the abandoned harbor, draping the great warehouse like a hulking block of steel. A lone yellow bulb swayed overhead, casting its pale glow across the damp concrete floor. The air reeked of rust and salt. Outside, the waves crashed in rhythm, but in James's chest, each wave was a drumbeat urging him forward. He crouched behind rusting containers, eyes locked on the warehouse doors. Fire blazed in his gaze. Tonight would be the end. Garrett had chosen this place as his lair, believing Hannah a perfect pawn, a bait too powerful for James to resist. But here, James would turn the game. Inside, Hannah sat bound beneath the sickly light. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned bright in defiance of the fear tightening her chest. Garrett's voice slithered out of the shadows. "You're nothing but a piece on the board. When James walks in here, Gull's Point will be mine." Hannah's lips curled in a weary but steady smile. "You're wrong, Garrett. Gull's Point isn't a town you can swallow anymore." His eyes narrowed, his smile venomous. "We'll see, child. When he comes, we'll see who's mistaken." Outside, James raised his hand. Silent figures shifted in the dark, villagers and local police, circling the building, sealing every exit. Their eyes carried the same flame that burned in James's. He tightened the leather strap on his wrist, the keepsake Hannah once cherished. From the lighthouse keychain, he breathed deep, whispering to himself, "Hold on, Hannah. This time, I won't let you stand alone." A gust rattled the doors. James's hand lifted in one final signal. The air inside thickened, ready to burst. The iron doors banged wide with a crash. Garrett and his men flinched as beams of flashlights pierced the shadows. "Police, drop your weapons." Garrett snarled, his mask cracking. "Stop them!" His men lunged forward, pipes and knives flashing. Metal clashed. Boots thundered. Shouts split the air. Chaos stormed the warehouse. From the side, James charged in like a blade of steel. His fist felled the nearest guard, body crumpling to the floor. His eyes darted only once, catching Hannah's trembling lips, shaping his name. James. His heart twisted, but there was no time to pause. Garrett lurked in the shadows, watching, waiting. The fight raged. Villagers, men and women, who had once feared Garrett, now fought shoulder to shoulder. A young fisherman swung a shovel, sending a thug sprawling. A mother brandished a kitchen knife, eyes ablaze, shielding the boys behind her. And in that storm of violence, There was one rhythm: protect Hannah, protect Gull's point. Hannah writhed against her ropes, eyes fixed on James. To her, he was no longer the CEO haunted by guilt, but a warrior bleeding, unyielding, fighting for her and for them all. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered like a prayer, "God, give him strength." Glass shattered. Flames burst from a spilled fuel drum. Smoke churned, choking the air. The warehouse became an inferno of shadows and fire. James fought toward Hannah, but Garrett stepped out, pipe glinting in his grip, smile twisted. "So you came, James, right on time, to watch everything slip away." James's jaw clenched, fists curling. His voice was ragged but fierce. "Not this time, Garrett. Not Hannah. Not Gull's point." They collided. Pipe against steel rod, sparks flying. The clang rang out like thunder, echoing off steel walls. This was no boardroom duel. It was a battle between past and future. Garrett's weapon crashed down. James blocked, knees buckling under the force. Garrett leaned in, breath hot and snarling. "You'll never be strong enough. You're weak. You've always run." Blood traced James's lip, but fire lit his eyes. "Maybe I was weak, but now I have what you'll never know, a reason to fight." With a roar, he twisted, swinging hard. Garrett staggered back, crashing into crates, and just then, Hannah's wrist slipped free, her raw hands trembling with pain. But finally unbound, she rose, drenched in sweat and tears, eyes locked on James. In that moment, she knew whatever the outcome, this love had no retreat. She cried out above the roar, "James, you're not alone." Her voice pierced the chaos, a bell toll. In fire and smoke, James turned just long enough to see her standing free. Her eyes, his lighthouse in the storm. Strength surged through him. Garrett lunged again, pipe raised, rage blazing. "I'll end this here." "James, look out!" Hannah screamed. The pipe swung down like an executioner's blade. James caught it, the impact shuddering through his bones, driving him back against the steel wall. Rust flakes rained around him. Then sirens split the night. Boots thundered. Doors burst wide, light flooding in like dawn. "Police, drop it now." Garrett's eyes flickered with panic, but he snarled, seizing Hannah, dragging her into his grip, pipe at her throat. "Stay back, or she dies." Hannah's face was pale, but her gaze steady. "You've already lost." "Garrett, Gull's point is awake. You have nothing left to take." He tightened his grip, teeth bared, but then voices rose. "Enough, Garrett." Villagers filled the doorway. The old carpenter, Rosa, young men, and mothers, faces Garrett had once cowed, now stood tall, Shoulder to shoulder, the elder's cane trembled in his hand, but his voice rang true. Release her. This is our home, not your game. Their voices swelled, echoing across the warehouse. Let her go. Gull's point is ours. Garrett faltered, fear flashing as he saw it. Their unity, unbreakable, immune to his chains of law and money, and though the pipe still pressed to her throat, Hannah felt no fear. She felt strength coursing through the air, saw James standing before her with eyes alight, saw her town rising behind him like a wall of fire. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Tears of faith. James stepped forward, voice steady as iron. It's over. Garrett! The world held its breath. Garrett roared, pipe trembling against her skin. One more step and she dies. But James's gaze never wavered. Calm, resolute. He whispered, you never understood. You can steal money, land, power, but you'll never touch what binds us, love. Garrett's grip faltered for a fraction. James surged, fist striking like lightning. The pipe clattered to the floor. Hannah torn free. Garrett reeled, then was swarmed villagers and police converging, pinning him down, cuffs snapping shut. His snarl died in defeat. His eyes, the eyes of a beast cornered, but no one cared. Gull's point had won. Hannah stumbled forward, collapsing into James's arms. His embrace was iron, trembling with exhaustion, but unbroken. I'm here. I promised you'd never be alone, and I've kept it. And Hannah wept into his chest, but through her tears came a fragile smile. I believed you. Ever since the bell rang, I knew you wouldn't leave me. Around them, cheers erupted, shaking the rafters, spilling out into the harbor night. The people of Gull's Point embraced, voices ringing with joy, faces glowing with reborn hope. Garrett was led away in chains, his empire reduced to ashes, but no one watched him now. Their eyes were on one another, on the town they had defended, on the two figures holding fast at the heart of it all. James tightened his arms around Hannah, lifting his gaze through the smoke and dying flames. In his eyes, this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, and in the haze of the ruined warehouse, surrounded by love and triumph, two broken souls held each other close. Tonight, love had won, and Gull's Point, at last, could breathe again. Part 9. The People's House. That afternoon, Gull's Point gleamed brighter than it had in years. Sunshine spilled across the new red-tiled roof of a sturdy home by the sea. It wasn't a mansion of cold luxury, nor a glass-walled office tower, but something warmer. A house with wooden shutters, a broad porch that opened to the ocean, and a wide communal hall within. The townspeople had given it a simple but proud name, the people's house. Inside, the air was rich with the sense of celebration, freshly baked bread, steaming soup, the smoky tang of grilled meat. Children's laughter rang as they darted about, mingling with bursts of music from a guitar strummed in the corner. Long wooden tables groaned under plates brought by every family in town. It wasn't just a feast, it was the first page of a new chapter. James stood at the doorway, shirt sleeves rolled, his arms still marked by cuts that hadn't healed. Quietly, he took in the sight faces that once bent under fear, now lifted high, lit with smiles. What swelled inside him wasn't pride in skyscrapers he had built for the rich, but in this ordinary people. Laughing freely, Hannah entered with a tray of cakes she had baked herself. She wore a pale blue dress, hair loosely tied, her face still carrying traces of exhaustion, but her eyes sparkled as if they held the ocean itself. When she set the tray down, children swarmed, squealing with delight. One little boy clutched a slice of cake, gazing up at her. Miss Hannah, is this really the new home for all of us? She bent, smoothing his tousled hair, her smile tender. Yes, this isn't just your home. It belongs to everyone. A place where we can learn together, share together, and dream together. James's chest tightened, watching that moment. Once he thought Hannah was only the reason he had to atone for past sins. Now he knew she was the light, the strength that had shown him what it meant to truly build a home, not from steel and glass, but from love and trust. Glasses were raised, voices booming in unison. To Gull's point, to our house. Hannah lifted her gaze to James, her smile trembling with pride. Amid the cheers, their eyes found each other, and in silence, they sealed a promise not just to build a house, but a family for themselves and for this town. Later, the feast ebbed into clusters of neighbors gathered beneath golden lamplight. Against the new pinewood wall, a tall board stood waiting. With careful strokes of chalk, Hannah wrote, "Share your skills so Gull's Point can grow together." Murmurs rippled. Then, one by one, townsfolk began to step forward. The old carpenter, hair white but hands still strong, spoke first. "I'll teach the children how to build tables, how to craft shelves. They should learn to use a hammer, not just to fix a roof, but to shape something of their own." Applause filled the hall. Next, a broad-shouldered fisherman stood, his voice ringing. "I'll teach them knots, how to read the wind and tide. The sea is in our blood. If they respect it, if they know it, Gull's Point will never go hungry." A young mother holding her child rose, her voice trembling but firm. "I can teach cooking, simple meals." that feed more than bodies. They nourish hearts. I want my children to grow up on laughter at the table, not silence in fear. Hannah's eyes brimmed as she listened. These were the very people who once bowed to Garrett. Now, they stood tall, speaking of futures, with a courage that made her chest ache with hope. From the crowd, someone called out, "James, come right on the board too." All eyes turned to him. For a moment, he froze. Part of him still saw only the man from that old photograph, the CEO, who once stood beside Garrett, but now, with so many faces lit by hope, something within him stirred. He stepped forward, took the chalk, and after a pause wrote, "I will teach how to manage, how to grow a small effort into something lasting. I will teach how to protect your homes and dreams so no one can take them again." The hall erupted cheers, clapping, voices crying his name. James. He belongs to Gull's Point. He turned, his gaze meeting Hannah's. Her smile trembled, her eyes wet, as though she knew his promise wasn't just to the community, but to her alone. Everyone understood then. This house wasn't built from timber and stone. It was built from hands, from skills, from one shared heartbeat. By morning, sunlight poured through the wide windows of the new home. The hall bustled with life. Rough wooden desks lined the room. Tools, ropes, books, even a few medical kits Hannah had brought filled the corners. Children's voices rang bright as bells. The carpenter knelt with a boy, guiding a saw into pine. "Steady now. Don't rush. Strength isn't what matters. Patience is." The boy's nervous hands steadied the saw, biting a straight line. When the wood split clean, he beamed. "I did it." The room erupted in cheers, warm as midsummer. Across the hall, the fisherman's calloused hands flew over a rope. "This knot moors a boat. Tie it wrong. The wind takes her away. Tie it right. She stays, just like this house will stay forever with Gull's Point." A girl tried, fumbling, then at last made the knot hold. Applause burst, her grin wide. At the center table, Hannah wrapped a bandage around a woman's wrist, explaining gently, "We don't need to be doctors, but knowing how to care for wounds can save a life when it matters." The woman clutched Hannah's hand, whispering, "Because of you, I feel safe." From the doorway, James watched. Children's smiles, calloused hands learning, women's eyes shining with new trust. It filled him with a peace no billion-dollar deal ever had. And when he heard Hannah's laughter ripple through it all, he trembled with the certainty this was the legacy he longed for. Stepping into the hall, he lifted his voice. "I once thought I could only build towers for the wealthy, but today I see the greatest work of my life is here, a place where people grow together. The room thundered with applause. That night, sea winds whispered through open doors. The hall no longer echoed with lessons, but glowed with firelight. Families gathered in a circle around the hearth. Wood cracked and sparked, flames painting tired but radiant faces. Bowls of soup passed from hand to hand, bread broken and shared. Children dozed against their parents, safe. For the first time in years, Gull's Point exhaled peace. A middle-aged man rose, his weathered face glistening, voice rough but steady. I want to tell a story. For years, I bowed to Garrett when he threatened my home. I stayed silent when he strangled the price of my catch. I swallowed it. But the night the bell rang from the old tower, I knew it was time to stop being afraid. The hall hushed, the fire casting his shadow tall. He paused, then added, and I want to thank you, not just James or Hannah, but everyone here who stood together. We didn't win because of one person. We won because we believed in each other. Hannah's eyes blurred. For so long, she thought Gull's Point was doomed to fear, but now, in the circle of firelight, she saw something new, strength, born of unity. Her tears fell, but they were tears of faith. A young girl cradled a guitar, her voice soft at first, then strong. She sang of the lighthouse, of waves, of a home that never faded. Others joined, one by one, until the room swelled with harmony, a rough, simple choir. But it rang like an oath. James sat beside Hannah, silent, watching her. The firelight danced in her blue eyes, making him feel both humbled and blessed. He whispered, just for her, you see, this is what a real home feels like. Her voice shook, but her gaze was steady. Yes, and maybe it's finally your true family too. For the first time, he took her hand without hesitation. Her warmth surged through him, stronger than any flame. The fire crackled, the song soared, and in both their hearts, something new began. At dawn, Gull's Point awoke in hues of rose and gold. Waves sang against the shore as if heralding a new life. Before the porch of the new house, the whole town gathered, faces alight, eager to witness this moment. A white cloth covered a great wooden sign at the gate. After days of debate and laughter, they had chosen the name together. When the cloth was pulled away, the crowd erupted in cheers. The people's house, the sound of applause rose and blended with the cries of the seagulls, creating such a powerful chorus that more than a few people were moved to tears. Hannah stepped forward, a small piece of paper trembling in her hand. She faltered for a moment, but when her eyes met the trust shining from those around her, her heart steadied. Today, we don't just have a house made of wood and stone. Her voice broke softly. We have a home built with love, with trust. Here, every child will learn the skills to stand tall. Here, every soul will be heard and cherished. The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. An old woman wiped her tears. A child clung tightly to his father's hand. Hannah drew a deep breath, then continued, "This is proof that Gull's Point can rise again from the shadows, and it is proof that love, once planted, will never die." Then came Moon of Death. James stepped forward, no paper in hand, no prepared speech, but his eyes shone bright, and his voice rang strong, steady, like the ancient bell from the old tower. "I have built many towers in the city," he said, "but none of them compare to this one, because this isn't mine alone. This belongs to all of us." He paused, his gaze locking on Hannah. "And I promise, I will not just build a house for you. I will build a future with you. Here, with the people I love." The words struck like a spark, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Voices shouted his name, but James saw only Hannah, and in that moment, between the roar of the crowd and the first rays of dawn, Hannah understood. The vow to build a home, to build a family, was no longer a metaphor. It had become reality, carved out of sweat, tears, and love. His hand reached for hers, clasping it firmly. Together, they turned toward the crowd, smiles shining through their tears. And so, the house they had built was not just a shelter for the community, but the doorway to a new family. A place where love rose above all divisions and all past shadows. Part 10. A new spring, morning, draped Gull's Point in a thin veil of mist. Like a silken shawl, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the windows, painting warm streaks across the wooden floor of the new home. In the small room where James and Hannah stayed, the cries of seagulls drifted in from the distant shore, blending with the steady rhythm of the waves. Together, they formed a lullaby for the dawn. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, her trembling hands holding something small, yet heavy with the weight of an entire world. A pregnancy test with 2 bright red lines. Her heart pounded wildly, caught between fear and an overwhelming joy that left her breathless. For years, she had known only loss and loneliness, but now, resting in her hands, was the proof of a new beginning, the tiny life growing inside her and James. She heard footsteps she knew by heart. James had returned from his morning walk, shoes damp with dew, his shirt fluttering gently in the breeze. When his eyes found Hannah sitting there, his face softened. "You're up early," he smiled, setting down a small bouquet of wildflowers, still wet with morning mist. Hannah pressed her lips together, unable to speak right away. She rose, her heart racing as though it might leap from her chest, and slowly stepped toward him. Then, with trembling hands, she offered him the test. James froze for a moment. His eyes widened, almost disbelieving. He took it, his gaze lingering on the two vivid lines. His breath caught. Hannah. His voice cracked, whispered like a prayer. Is it true? You're carrying our child. Tears streamed down Hannah's cheeks, the sweetest tears she had ever shed. She nodded, unable to form words. In that instant, James shed every trace of composure. The polished CEO who once commanded billion-dollar deals was gone. He pulled her into his arms, shoulders shaking, his face buried in her hair. I can't believe it, he whispered, voice breaking. You've given me a family, just as you promised that day. Hannah pressed her face to his chest, hearing the frantic beat of his heart, and thought, spring has truly come for us. Golden sunlight spilled across the room, as though blessing the moment. James still held Hannah tightly, then slowly pulled back, his eyes red, but glowing with a light she had never seen before. It feels like the whole world has stopped just to witness this, he murmured, brushing his fingers gently across her tear-stained cheek. But tell me, Hannah, are you afraid? She bit her lip, nodding faintly. Of course, I've lived too long with fear, with loss. Sometimes I wonder, will I really be enough to be a good mother? James clasped her hand, his voice firm, like the man who once stood before shareholders with unshakable resolve, but now softened with a tenderness only she would ever know. Hannah, you kept an entire town alive with nothing but your kindness. You healed the wounds of people who had lost their faith. You gave me a home. If anyone was born to be a mother, it's you. Then James dropped to his knees before her, his hands trembling as they rested against her still flat belly, a universe already stirring within. He bent down and kissed it softly, like a sacred ritual. My child, he whispered, voice breaking. I promise to protect you and your mother with my life. No matter what it costs me, I will never let anyone harm either of you. Hannah's hand slipped into his hair, her throat tightening. Before her was no longer the cold CEO the world once feared, but simply James, a husband, a father, a man who had chosen love over power. Morning light streamed through the window. Seagulls soared in the sky as if to sing their blessing, and Hannah's smile glistened through her tears. Maybe this is the greatest deal of your life, she whispered. A deal you'll never need to win, because love alone is enough. James laughed softly through his tears, pulling her back into his arms. No, Hannah, this isn't a deal. This is destiny. The room seemed to glow brighter, and within their hearts, spring truly began. That afternoon, Gull's Point came alive in a new way. Flags of every color waved along the shore. Long tables covered in white cloth brimmed with homemade dishes, and laughter rang out. Weaving into the song of the sea, Hannah, in a simple white dress, walked hand in hand with James. Out of their new home, every eye turned to them, shining with warmth, as though they were the ones leading the town out of its shadows. Children ran up, weaving tiny flower crowns into Hannah's hair. James bent down with a laugh, letting a little boy crown him as well. To the townsfolk, the once distant CEO now stood before them as one of their own, no longer a stranger, but a son of Gull's Point. On a wooden stage, the local band struck up a joyful tune. People joined hands, dancing in circles. James turned to Hannah, bowing slightly, and held out his hand. "May I have the honor of the first dance of spring?" Her cheeks flushed, but she slipped her hand into his. They stepped into the circle, their movements clumsy at first, but soon Hannah felt herself soaring, her white dress swirling, her hair catching the golden light of the sunset. And James, he never took his eyes off her, as if the whole world had disappeared, leaving only her. When the music stopped, the air suddenly trembled with sound. 3 deep peals from the ancient tower bells rolled across the horizon, solemn and mighty, as if declaring the town had come alive again. Love had been reborn, and a new beginning was here. Cheers and tears swept through the crowd. The old clasped hands with the young. The once fearful now stood tall. Gull's Point had found its heart again. James drew Hannah close, whispering over the echoing bells. "Do you hear that, Hannah? That's the sound of our family." She nodded, her lips trembling, tears falling freely. In her heart, the child yet unborn seemed already part of the town, already woven into the love rising from the ruins. The sunset washed everything in gold. Waves, bells, and laughter blended into a single song, and with it, true spring had begun for the town and for their hearts. That night, the shoreline blazed with hundreds of torches. Families gathered. Folk music mingled with children's laughter and the breath of the sea. Above them, a clear night sky unveiled a crescent moon, like a quiet smile from the universe. Then came a crack, and the first firework bloomed overhead, scattering red and gold across the heavens. Cheers erupted. The whole town lifted their eyes, faces glowing with joy, as though each burst of light was a punctuation mark for Gull's Point's rebirth. Quietly, James and Hannah slipped away from the crowd, settling on the cool sand where the waves lapped at their feet. Fireworks reflected across their faces, colors painting their silence. James turned, his voice deep and hushed against the chaos outside. I once thought my life would end in lifeless boardrooms, where every decision circled around money and power, but now. He gripped Hannah's hand. All I want is this, to sit here, with you, with our child. Hannah leaned against his shoulder. The distant booms of fireworks filled the night, but their moment was wrapped in peace. Do you ever wonder, she whispered, who our child will take after? James chuckled softly. I hope they have your eyes. The eyes that healed an entire town. But I also hope they carry a strong heart, so they'll never fear the dark. Hannah's eyes shimmered. She touched her belly tenderly, holding the miracle inside. James leaned closer, pressing a trembling kiss to her forehead. Hannah, he whispered, voice thick with emotion, you're not just the love of my life. You're the mother of my family. Tears spilled from Hannah's eyes, blending into her smile. All her years of loss and loneliness seemed to wash away in that single sentence. Overhead, fireworks exploded into a rainbow, casting radiant light on the two figures seated hand in hand. The sand was cold beneath them, but their hearts burned with the warmth of spring. Far away, the cheers of the town still rang out, but for James and Hannah, the world had shrunk to just the two of them, and the tiny life stirring within, sheltered in love. At dawn, Gull's Point glowed beneath a soft veil of mist. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, gilding the sea and the red rooftops of the new homes. From the old tower, the bells tolled 3 times, deep and warm. A welcome to the first day of a new era. Hannah stepped onto the porch, a shawl draped around her shoulders. James was already there, holding a steaming cup of coffee. When he turned to her, his eyes shone with a happiness he could not hide. Listen, Hannah, he said, pointing to the tower. His voice was husky. That's no longer the sound of alarm. That's the sound of welcome. The sound of our family. She moved to him, resting against his chest. Her hand found her belly, and James gently laid his hand over hers. Sunlight spilled across them, gilding the moment in sacred warmth. Soon, townsfolk began to gather on the path, carrying baked bread, fresh flowers, and humble gifts. A little girl ran forward, handing Hannah a wildflower. This is for the baby, she whispered shyly. Hannah froze, eyes welling with tears. She bent to embrace the child, as if holding the trust of the whole town in her arms. James's throat tightened at the sight. He knew now his promise to Hannah to build a house and a family had grown beyond themselves. It now belonged to all of Gull's Point. An old man's voice rose, trembling with pride. We have lost so much, but today we have found our home again. And with this home, we will never be alone. Applause broke out. mingling with tears and laughter. Over the crimson sky, seagulls soared in flocks, sending their blessing. James bent close to Hannah's ear, his whisper tender. Do you see? This is the family I always dreamed of. Not just you and me, but an entire community. Hannah nodded, tears streaming, her lips curved in a smile. She squeezed his hand, whispering back, spring has truly begun, James, and this time it will never end. The town embraced beneath the rising sun, their joy woven together, and at the heart of it all, Hannah and James stood side by side, two once broken souls who had found healing in each other. In their arms, a new beginning was being written not just for a family, but for all of Gull's Point. The sunset blazed across the sea, casting waves of gold upon the silver foam as they rose and fell like the heartbeat of a small town reborn after so many storms. Wooden tables stretched in long rows across the sand, draped in white cloths, laden with bread still warm from the oven, roasted fish, and glasses of red wine. A guitar's melody floated through the air, joined by the simple, heartfelt voices of the villagers, weaving into a song of praise for a brand new beginning. James led Hannah into the circle, his arm wrapped firmly around hers. The crowd erupted in applause, every gaze brimming with love, fixed on the two who had brought such change. Hannah smiled softly, one hand resting protectively over the tiny miracle within her, while James clasped her hand with pride and tenderness shining in his eyes. And then the bells of Gull's Point's ancient tower rang twice, deep and warm, but this time they were not a warning, not a call for help. This time they were a celebration, the bells of unity, of family, of love, and of hope. The townsfolk cheered, embracing one another, raising their glasses toward James and Hannah. An elderly woman, her hands trembling, lifted her voice. You've shown us that a true home is not built from bricks and stone, but from the heart. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, though they were tears of joy. James leaned close, his whisper meant only for her. A real home is the place where your heart feels safe, and from today on, Gull's Point will always have that kind of home. Torchlight shimmered along the beach, faces glowing with renewed faith, arms wrapped tightly around one another in a tapestry of resilience. In that moment, every old wound dissolved, leaving only love, strength, and the unbreakable bond of a community. For no matter how fierce the storms outside may rage, if our hearts have a place to return to, we are never truly alone. Love, kindness, and unity, these are the strongest foundations of any home. Have you ever witnessed a community rise up for one another the way Gull's Point did? Share your story with us. Leave your thoughts below and give this tale a number from 0 to 10, and don't forget to follow the channel. Ring the bell so you won't miss the next chapters of the CEO Love Stories tales that may touch your heart in ways you never expected. Sati.